TIFU by trying to impress my new girlfriend with my cooking skills and almost burning down my house. So, a little backstory. I, 26M, recently started dating this amazing woman, let's call her Emily, 24F. We've been seeing each other for about 2 months now, and things were going pretty well. We both work long hours, so our dates have mostly been low-key, Netflix, takeout, a couple of hikes, but we've never really had the time for anything too extravagant. Emily's been dropping hints that she loves a good home-cooked meal, and while I'm no Gordon Ramsay, I thought I could impress her with a nice dinner. I've always fancied myself as a decent cook, mostly because I can make a mean pasta and a halfway decent steak. However, I've never actually cooked anything beyond basic meals. So when Emily suggested coming over for dinner at my place, I figured, why not go big? I'm going to cook her something fancy and show her that I've got some culinary chops. I even got a bottle of wine to pair with the meal. You know, really set the mood. The plan was to make a homemade chicken Alfredo from scratch, no pre-made sauces here, folks. I researched a recipe online, grabbed all the ingredients, and started prepping about an hour before she was set to arrive. Everything was going smoothly, and I was feeling pretty confident. That was until I realized I had no idea what I was doing. First mistake, I decided to make the sauce from scratch. How hard could it be, right? You just melt butter, add cream, throw in some Parmesan, and season it. Well, what they don't tell you in the recipe is that it's really easy to scorch the butter if you don't keep a close eye on it. I'd like to say that I was distracted, but I was just an idiot who didn't think it through. So, as I was preparing the pasta, I noticed a slight burning smell. I quickly turned off the heat and thought it would be fine. But, oh no, it was far from fine. The sauce had become a chunky, burnt mess, and it was at that moment that I realized I'd ruined the entire base of the dish. The thought of calling it quits crossed my mind, but I couldn't do that. Not after I'd built this dinner up in my head as this grand gesture of culinary talent. I needed to salvage this meal, so I tossed the burnt sauce and tried again with a new batch. Second mistake, I underestimated the importance of multitasking. At this point, the water for the pasta was still heating up, so I started working on the chicken. I decided to pan-fry it to give it that crispy texture that would impress Emily. I tossed the chicken breasts into the hot pan and, of course, didn't think to lower the heat. The chicken started to cook way too fast and began to sear at the edges while the middle was still raw. At that point, I started sweating bullets because I knew the chicken wasn't going to cook properly, and I didn't want to serve her undercooked meat. I grabbed the chicken, threw it into the oven to finish cooking, and prayed for a miracle. Meanwhile, I noticed that the pasta water had finally come to a boil. I dumped in the pasta and, instead of waiting for it to cook properly, I just kept stirring it furiously to make sure it didn't stick. I didn't check the timer or follow any instructions. After what felt like forever, I drained the pasta, but it looked a little overcooked and mushy. Great. Third mistake, I forgot about the wine. I'd left it on the counter, so by the time I went to open it, I realized it had already been sitting out for too long, and it was too warm to really enjoy. I briefly considered putting it in the fridge but then realized it would take at least 30 minutes to chill. I didn't have time for that. I decided to just go with it and opened the bottle, hoping it wouldn't taste like warm vinegar. By this point, I was running out of time. Emily was on her way, and I had a half-cooked meal, burnt sauce, and overdone pasta. I quickly plated everything, added some Parmesan to try to hide my failures, and set the table as best as I could. I then spent the next few minutes frantically cleaning the kitchen, trying to hide the evidence of my disaster. Finally, Emily arrived, looking gorgeous as always. She stepped inside and immediately complimented the smell of dinner. I had no idea how she couldn't smell the faint traces of burning, but I was too relieved to care at that moment. I offered her some wine, hoping the temperature wouldn't be too much of a turn-off. She took a sip, and for a second, I thought she might grimace, but she just smiled and said, "It's good, not too bad." Thank God for small mercies. We sat down to eat, and she took her first bite. She paused for a moment, looking at me with a mix of curiosity and concern. She said, the sauce is interesting. I've never had anything quite like it. My heart sank. Is it bad? I asked, suddenly aware of how much pressure I was putting on her to be polite. No, it's just a little different. The texture's kind of lumpy, she said carefully. What did you put in it? I could feel my face getting red. Just butter, cream, parmesan, the usual stuff, I muttered, trying to sound casual. She smiled politely but clearly wasn't enjoying it. She took another bite of the pasta and winced slightly. And the pasta is a little overcooked, don't you think? At this point, I could see that the dinner was a complete bust, and I felt embarrassed as hell. But Emily was being so nice about it. She tried to salvage the evening by complimenting the chicken, which was actually decent, but she didn't seem overly thrilled. I felt like a failure, but I couldn't stop trying to keep the conversation going. After dinner, we had a nice enough time, but the awkwardness lingered in the air. Emily kept her smile on, but I could tell she wasn't fully enjoying herself. We chatted, but the tension of the failed meal hung between us. Finally, she left, thanking me for dinner. I walked her out, and as I said goodbye, I could tell she was a little uncomfortable. The next day, I received a text from her. It was sweet, but I could tell she was trying to be kind. She said she had a great time, but maybe we should order out next time. No mention of the food disaster, but it was clear she wasn't keen on repeating the experience. I texted back apologizing profusely, and she assured me it wasn't that bad, but I knew it was. I've since learned that I'm much better off sticking to what I know: pasta, steak, and maybe an occasional salad. If anyone is thinking about impressing someone with a homemade meal, take it from me, maybe practice the recipe a couple of times before your big night. Or better yet, just order some takeout and save yourself the stress. I can't help but laugh now, but man, I was in full panic mode that night. So yeah, TIFU by trying to cook a fancy dinner and almost ruining my relationship with a girl who I really liked, all because I didn't want to just stick with the basics. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps the content grow and motivates me to create even more great videos. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any new uploads. By the way, I'm curious, when do you usually watch my videos? While working, studying, or just relaxing at home? Let me know in the comments, I'd love to hear from you. Thank you for your support. TIFU by accidentally making my girlfriend think I was planning to propose, and it's been 3 months of awkwardness ever since. So, I've been dating my girlfriend, Sarah, for about a year now. We're in our mid-20s, both relatively early in our careers, and we've talked about getting married one day, but nothing serious. I mean, we both agree we want to get married, just not yet. At least that's what I thought. Here's where I messed up. A few months ago, Sarah started to get really into jewelry. At first, I thought it was just a passing phase. She'd scroll through Instagram, and I'd hear her talk about these gorgeous rings she was eyeing, or how she couldn't wait to buy some new earrings. I didn't think much of it until one day she started talking about how she wanted to get the perfect engagement ring eventually, and she had been saving up for it. I panicked a little. Not because I wasn't planning to marry her, but because I wasn't planning to propose yet. I knew I wasn't ready for that, but at the same time, I didn't want to come across as dismissive or unromantic. I mean, I love Sarah, and the idea of marrying her is definitely in my future, just not right now. So I made a classic mistake. I decided to test the waters by subtly asking her about her thoughts on marriage. You know, casual stuff, like how she feels about weddings, what kind of rings she likes, and stuff like that. I thought I was being smooth and clever, but in hindsight, I see how it all went terribly wrong. I thought I'd be clever about it and went into full accidental romantic mode. I started looking up engagement rings online just to get an idea of what she liked. Of course, I kept it on a separate tab so she wouldn't catch me in the act. The idea was to get her preferences and use that info when the time was right. I also started reading wedding planning blogs just to understand what goes into a proposal. It's all pretty generic stuff, but it was a lot of research for something that wasn't happening anytime soon. One evening, we were watching TV and chatting about our future when I made the classic blunder. In the middle of our conversation, I mentioned that I'd been looking at rings. Just casually, you know? It wasn't meant to be a big deal. But of course, Sarah's eyes lit up, and she asked what kind of rings I liked. Now, instead of answering the question normally, I panicked. My brain froze. In my head, I was thinking, well, now I need to act like I'm not actually looking at rings, but I also can't act like I don't know what she's talking about. So, I said something like, oh, you know, just some cool designs and stuff. Nothing too fancy. And then I awkwardly smiled and added, I think I might have an idea of what kind of ring I'd get when the time comes. Now, let me tell you, this is where I made my first big mistake. I meant to say something like, eventually, or not for a while. But in the heat of the moment, I said, when the time comes, which, to her, sounded like I was seriously planning to propose. I immediately realized my mistake, but it was too late. The look on her face was one of pure excitement. She couldn't hide it. She asked me 1,000 questions, how, when, where, and if I was sure I wanted to go ahead with this. At this point, I couldn't exactly backpedal without sounding suspicious, so I said the only thing I could think of, I don't know, it's just a thought, you know? But maybe soon. This was the worst thing I could have said. Now she was convinced that it was going to happen, and I hadn't even intended to give that impression. From that moment on, things were different. Sarah started talking about marriage a lot. She'd point out wedding venues whenever we went out, and she'd bring up bridal magazines. She even started looking at dresses, which, in hindsight, was way too early. I didn't know how to handle it, so I just went along with it, thinking maybe it was just a phase. But it wasn't. Every day felt like I was walking a tightrope. She'd drop hints about how she wanted everything to be perfect for when I proposed. She was making plans. I hadn't even figured out how I wanted to propose, let alone when. Then, the real problem hit, she started telling her friends. And not just her friends, her family too. One weekend, we went to visit her parents, and the moment we arrived, her mom started talking about wedding planning. It was like a punch to the gut. I had to pretend that everything was fine and that this wasn't a massive misunderstanding. Her mom even started asking me if I had picked out a ring yet. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded and said I was working on it. At this point, Sarah was talking about the wedding as if it was happening tomorrow. She had already picked out colors, themes, and even thought about what her bridesmaids would wear. And here I was, just nodding along like a damn idiot, trying to keep my cool. I didn't want to ruin her excitement, but I also didn't want to lie and act like I was planning to propose in the immediate future. Finally, 3 weeks ago, it came to a head. Sarah sat me down one night, looked me in the eyes, and asked, "So, do you have a date in mind?" "I just want to know so I can plan everything else around it." And that's when it all crashed down. I couldn't keep up the charade anymore. I told her the truth, "Sarah, I haven't actually been planning to propose yet. I was just nervous about talking about it, and I got carried away. I didn't mean to make you think it was happening soon." She looked shocked. Not angry, just confused. After a long silence, she said, "So, you're not planning to propose anytime soon?" I shook my head and said, "Not right now, no. I love you, and I want to spend my life with you, but I'm not ready yet." It took a while for her to process everything, and for the next few weeks, things were a little off. The tension was there, but we've talked through it now, and we're back to being okay. Still, it's been awkward. She's been a bit distant ever since, and even though she says everything is fine, I can tell she's still processing it. I learned a valuable lesson here. If you're not ready for a huge step in a relationship, don't accidentally give the impression that you are. Now I just hope that we can move forward without any more misunderstandings about the future. Moral of the story, don't try to test the waters. Communicate clearly and honestly, even if it feels like you're going to ruin the moment. Trust me, it's better than pretending you know what's going on. And yeah, we're still together. But I'm definitely not looking up any more engagement rings for the time being. I still can't believe what happened. It's one of those things that's so absurd, it's almost hard to tell people without them thinking I'm making it up. But it's 100% real, and I'll never live this down. So, here goes. It all started with me trying to help my friend, Jake. He's always been a little, let's just say, less than organized. The kind of guy who forgets his wallet at home, can't keep track of time, and always ends up with a mountain of unfinished projects. But despite all that, I've always had his back. After all, he's the guy who helped me move my couch into my new apartment last year and nearly broke his back doing it. So when he asked me to help him set up a new PC, I didn't think twice. Jake recently got into gaming, which is kind of a miracle in itself. We've been friends for years, and while I've always been into tech and gaming, Jake has never been the type. He was more into playing FIFA on his console and occasionally dinking around with his old laptop. But then, one day, he came to me with a gleam in his eye. "Hey, man, I'm thinking of upgrading to a gaming PC. What do you think?" Now, this is the kind of thing I live for. I love building PCs, I love the excitement of new tech, and I love helping people get into gaming. So I immediately said, hell yeah, let's do it. We spent hours online browsing parts. We debated the merits of different GPUs, CPUs, motherboards, and cases. In the end, Jake settled on a pretty solid mid-tier build. Nothing insane, but more than enough to get him started. We scheduled a day for me to come over to his place and help him build the machine. It was supposed to be a simple afternoon, grab the parts, assemble the PC, and maybe play a little League of Legends to test it out once everything was running smoothly. Now, I should have known something was off when Jake handed me a box of parts and said, so I ordered all the pieces online, but I didn't really read the fine print. "Can you check if everything's okay?" I shrugged it off. I figured, hey, how hard can it be? He's got a CPU, a GPU, RAM, motherboard, and a power supply. I'm sure it'll be fine. Well, it wasn't fine. As I started unpacking the box, I realized Jake's idea of reading the fine print was more like skimming the product pages, clicking buy now, and hoping for the best. Some of the parts were clearly mismatched. The RAM he ordered was too high profile for the case he bought, the motherboard was incompatible with the CPU, and to top it all off, the power supply was underpowered for the GPU he had chosen. I stared at the mess of parts in front of me, trying not to let the frustration show. "Jake," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "This is not gonna work. You can't run this PC with this power supply, and the motherboard won't fit with the CPU." Jake's face fell. "Wait, really? Oh man, I didn't even think about that." I took a deep breath. "Okay, it's fine. We can work around this. I'll just take the parts back and get the right ones. It'll take a couple of days, but we'll figure it out." So, I packed up everything, took it back to the store, and spent the next couple of days hunting for the correct parts. I felt like I was back in college, working on a big group project where one person didn't pull their weight and left you to do all the heavy lifting. But, no big deal. It was my friend, and I wanted him to enjoy his new PC. Finally, after a few days of running around, I got everything we needed. New motherboard, correct RAM, a power supply that could handle the GPU's power draw, the whole shebang. By then, it was the weekend, and I told Jake to clear his schedule. It was time to finally build this thing. Jake was excited. I was excited. Everything was set up, and we started putting the PC together. It went smoothly at first. We carefully installed the motherboard, placed the CPU, installed the RAM, and attached the storage drives. When we got to the GPU, I could tell Jake was eager to see it all come together. He was beaming, like a kid on Christmas morning. But then, it was time to hook up the power supply. I had to admit, I was starting to feel a little rushed. I had been at this for hours, and my patience was wearing thin. It's not that I didn't want to help Jake, it's just that I knew I had to finish up quickly because I had other things I needed to do later. So, as I was connecting the cables to the power supply, I accidentally plugged the 24-pin connector into the wrong slot on the motherboard. I didn't realize my mistake until after everything was plugged in and we tried to power up the PC. I hit the power button, and instead of the expected whir of the fans and lights, there was just a click and then silence. Jake stared at the screen, waiting for something to happen. Nothing did. We both sat there for a moment, unsure of what to do. Man, did I do something wrong?" Jake asked. I frowned. "Hold on, let me check something." I powered off the system and double-checked the connections. That's when I realized the issue. The 24-pin connector wasn't properly seated in the motherboard. I felt a wave of frustration flood over me. In my rush to get it done, I had completely overlooked the most basic step. "Jake," I said, rubbing my forehead. "I made a mistake. I plugged the power supply in wrong. Let me fix it." Jake's face fell again. "Are you sure it's okay? We don't have to take it apart again, do we?" I shook my head. "No, it's fine. I just need to reseat the connector." So, I carefully unplugged everything, reseated the cable, and tried again. This time, when I hit the power button, the PC came to life. Fans spun, lights flickered on, and the screen lit up with the BIOS splash screen. It was working. Everything was good. Jake let out a relieved sigh. "Dude, you're a genius. I thought I was gonna have to wait another week to play on this thing." I smiled, feeling a little better about the whole situation. "No problem. Just, you might want to double-check your parts next time." Jake chuckled, clearly not taking the lesson to heart. "Yeah, I'll do that. Thanks again, man." And that's when it happened. As I was putting everything back together, I absent-mindedly knocked the case onto the ground. The glass side panel shattered. Into a million tiny pieces. There was no saving it. The entire panel had shattered across the floor. Jake's eyes widened, and I could feel the heat creeping into my cheeks. "Well," I said, laughing awkwardly, "at least the PC works now, right?" Jake didn't say anything for a moment. Then he started laughing. "Well, I guess I'll add that to the list of things you owe me for," he said with a grin. I sighed in defeat. "Yeah, I'm gonna need a new case." In the end, the PC worked perfectly, but I spent the next week hunting for a replacement side panel. Jake took it all in stride, but I will never live down the fact that I broke the damn case after everything that went wrong. I helped him build the PC. I fixed all the problems he caused. And then, I accidentally broke it. I think we're still friends, though. I'm just waiting for him to ask me to build his next PC. TIFU. By getting way too drunk at my best friend's wedding and ruining the reception. It all started with the fact that I had been planning for my best friend Kevin's wedding for months. Kevin and I had been friends since childhood, and even though we had drifted a bit in our 20s due to life changes, we had always stayed close. When he got engaged to Sarah, I was excited and honored to be his best man. I had been dreaming about this day, about standing next to my best friend as he married the love of his life. But I had also been planning to make it unforgettable in a different way. I'm not going to lie, I was not exactly a lightweight when it came to drinking. In fact, I'd always been the type of guy to go all in when it came to parties and celebrations. So when Kevin and Sarah asked me to give a speech at the reception, I was pretty stoked. I thought I'd really nail it, and everyone would be talking about my best man speech for years to come. The problem was, I'd had a few too many drinks before I even got up there. It started harmlessly enough with a couple of beers at the hotel before we even left for the venue. The guys in the bridal party were all hanging out, laughing, and celebrating. But the alcohol was flowing fast. By the time we arrived at the reception, I was feeling pretty good, to say the least. And, of course, I was nervous about the speech, so I thought, hey, what's a couple more drinks to calm my nerves? Well, a couple turned into a few. And then a few more. Before I knew it, it was time for the best man's speech, and I was more than a little tipsy. Now, I don't remember exactly what I said in the speech. I'm told it was a mixture of funny, heartfelt, and rambling nonsense, but the general vibe of the room was that people were trying to be supportive, even if they weren't sure if they were witnessing a genius moment or an absolute disaster. At some point, I veered off topic entirely and started telling embarrassing stories from our teenage years. In hindsight, these weren't the kinds of stories that should have been told in front of everyone, let alone at a formal wedding reception. I'd always been the guy who would tell a joke even if it didn't land, and boy, did I land hard. But here's where things got bad. After the speech, someone, probably the bartender, suggested that we take shots in honor of the happy couple. I was all in, of course. Shots were my thing. I knocked back 1, then 2, then 5, just to keep the party going. By this point, I was so out of it that I didn't even realize I had started hugging random people and giving unsolicited advice to guests. I remember asking one woman if she wanted to be my second best friend, because, best men need backup, right? But apparently, this didn't go over well. She wasn't amused. Neither were the other guests, who were starting to give me confused and concerned looks. Then came the dancing. Everyone was on the dance floor, and I joined in like I was the star of a music video. I'm talking full-on flailing arms and an awkward, offbeat version of the worm. I was pretty sure I was killing it, but I'm told by several witnesses that I looked more like a wounded giraffe trying to navigate a minefield. But I wasn't about to let that stop me. I was on fire, or so I thought. Around midnight, I decided that I should probably try to get a little bit more serious about the situation. I had been stumbling and laughing and, in general, causing a scene all night. So, naturally, I went up to Kevin and Sarah, who were sitting at their table, looking exhausted from the whole wedding day. I figured I'd give them a heartfelt, private congratulations, but I'm not sure it came out that way. According to Sarah, I told them both something along the lines of, "You two are like, totally perfect for each other. I mean, Kevin, you're lucky she picked you, man. And Sarah, well, good luck with this guy, right?" And then I hugged them both. But in my drunken state, I must have hugged them way too hard. I ended up knocking over the centerpiece, an expensive floral arrangement, and sent it crashing to the floor. The room went silent for a brief moment as everyone looked at the disaster I had just caused. In that second, I could feel my face turning bright red. I muttered something about getting them a new one, but it didn't help. That's when things really started to spiral. I went to sit down at a table to collect myself, but instead of calming down, I kept getting up and walking around, trying to find something to do with myself. At some point, I tried to join the bride and groom in the photo booth, thinking it would be a cute, fun moment. I remember Sarah saying, "No, we're trying to have a quiet moment," but I just insisted that we needed a group shot. My persistence didn't exactly win me any friends. By the end of the night, Kevin had to take me aside and have a serious conversation about how I had almost ruined the wedding. I felt terrible. I had no memory of half the things I had said or done, but apparently, I had embarrassed myself, my friends, and most importantly, the bride and groom. I went home that night with a sense of shame I'd never felt before. I knew I'd let down my best friend. Kevin texted me the next day to tell me that, while he appreciated my enthusiasm, I needed to tone it down at the next wedding I attended. He even joked about how I was banned from the open bar at his future events. So, yeah, I absolutely ruined my best friend's wedding by being way too drunk. I'll never live this one down. Kevin's family still makes fun of me, Sarah gives me side-eye every time we run into each other, and my friends still talk about the epic disaster I caused whenever weddings come up. If there's one thing I learned from all this, it's that you can't party like you're at a bar when you're at a wedding reception. And if you're the best man, for the love of God, get your shit together before the speech. TIFU by accidentally making my life much harder with a simple decision to help a friend a few weeks ago. I found myself in a situation that I never thought I would end up in. It all started with an innocent favor for a friend, and it quickly spiraled into a chaotic series of events that I still can't believe happened. To give you some context, let me start from the beginning. I have this friend, let's call him Dan. We've known each other for a few years, and although we're not super close, we keep in touch. Dan is one of those people who always seems to have a problem that needs fixing. He's the kind of guy who will text you at 2 a.m. with some random issue that's somehow urgent. Most of the time, I would ignore these messages or give him a quick, "That sucks, dude, good luck with that." But on this particular evening, I was feeling generous and decided to actually help. Dan reached out to me with a rather unusual request. He had recently gotten into the world of buying and selling vintage cars, and he had just purchased a classic 1960s Mustang. The thing was, he wasn't entirely familiar with the mechanics of old cars and needed some assistance with a few repairs. He mentioned he was stuck at a mechanic's shop that was closing for the weekend and couldn't get any more help until Monday. He also mentioned that if he didn't get these repairs done soon, he'd lose a potential sale to someone else interested in the car. So, naturally, I agreed to help out. I'm no expert in vintage cars, but I do know my way around a wrench, and I thought, how bad can it be? I'll just help him with the basics, and he'll be on his way. I'd never worked on a Mustang before, but hey, it's a car, right? I figured we could tackle it together, and it'd be a fun Saturday project. I met up with Dan early that Saturday morning. He had already brought the car to a friend's garage that was located just outside of town, away from the hustle and bustle. The plan was simple: we'd assess the car, figure out what needed fixing, and do whatever we could to get it running smoothly. When I arrived, Dan was already there, pacing around the car looking a bit frantic. The Mustang was beautiful, no doubt about it. It had that vintage appeal, and you could tell it had been cared for over the years. However, the problem was that it had been sitting in a garage for months without being driven. It had a few issues, such as a non-working alternator, some fluid leaks, and a mysterious knocking sound coming from the engine. But nothing that seemed impossible to fix, at least that's what I thought. Dan handed me a wrench and said, "So, I need you to fix the alternator. I think it's just a loose wire, but I'm not sure. I don't want to break anything, so you might want to take a look at the manual before you dive in." I nodded and started pulling out the car's engine cover to get a better look at the alternator. As I was poking around, I realized the problem wasn't just a loose wire. The alternator was shot. It looked like it had been overworked for years, and it was in desperate need of replacement. The next problem was that the shop that had sold him the car didn't have the correct part, and we'd have to wait until Monday to order it. But I wasn't about to let that stop us. "No worries, I'll figure something out," I said, trying to stay calm and collected. I didn't want Dan to think I couldn't help. I quickly pulled up a few DIY guides on my phone, which were mostly generic how to fix alternators kind of videos. I didn't see why this would be any different from fixing an alternator in a normal car. After all, a car was a car, right? That's when things started to take a turn. I started disassembling parts of the engine to get to the alternator, but I quickly realized that I had no idea what I was doing. The parts weren't lining up the way they should. The alternator wasn't just broken, it was damaged in ways that would require a lot more than a simple replacement. I was in over my head. And to make matters worse, I had taken apart way too much of the engine to try to find a solution, and now the car wouldn't even start. Dan was standing there, looking more and more nervous as I continued to dig deeper into the engine. I could feel his anxiety mounting as he started pacing back and forth, muttering things like, "This wasn't supposed to be this complicated." I knew I needed to fix this, and fast, before he completely freaked out. I spent hours trying to fix the alternator, but each time I thought I'd solved the problem, something else would break. It was a disaster. By the time we realized we needed to get some parts replaced, it was already too late. The shops were closing for the weekend, and no one would be open until Monday. Dan was panicking, and I was starting to feel like I had just made everything worse. But it got worse. Much worse. In the midst of trying to put everything back together, I accidentally dropped a wrench into the engine bay. It didn't just fall to the ground. It somehow lodged itself inside a part of the engine, causing even more damage. The car wasn't just not starting anymore, it was now making loud grinding noises, and I was genuinely terrified that I had completely ruined the engine. I tried to fish out the wrench, but it was stuck. So, like an idiot, I tried to force it out, causing even more damage. Dan was standing next to me, visibly sweating now. "What did you do?" I didn't mean to. I just dropped the wrench and it got stuck." "What do you mean you didn't mean to?" "That's my Mustang. What are we supposed to do now?" I could feel my heart sinking as I realized just how deep in trouble I was. The Mustang was now a total wreck, and I had no idea how to fix it. Dan was beyond pissed, and I couldn't blame him. I had ruined his weekend, and now I was probably looking at hundreds, maybe thousands, of dollars in damage to fix it. I'd gone from trying to help a friend to absolutely destroying his car. And, to top it off, he still had to deal with a potential buyer who was waiting for the car to be ready. I had no idea how I was going to get out of this one. The rest of the day was a blur. Dan called in a few of his more mechanically inclined friends to try to help salvage the situation, but the damage had been done. The Mustang was out of commission for the weekend, and we all knew it would be a long and expensive repair job. By the time I left, I was mentally drained and felt like the worst friend in the world. I couldn't believe how quickly things had gone from simple car repairs to a full-blown disaster. So, here I am, still waiting to find out how much it's going to cost to fix everything. Dan hasn't spoken to me much since that day, and I don't blame him. I've apologized 100 times, but I know that I can't undo the mess I made. My simple decision to try and help a friend ended up causing more problems than I could have imagined. I'll never ever offer to fix anything for anyone again, especially when I don't actually know what I'm doing. TLDR, tried to help a friend fix his classic Mustang, made everything worse. Now I've probably ruined his car and our friendship. So, this all started on a Saturday afternoon when I decided to take the day off from work and just chill at home. I've been working non-stop for the past few weeks, and with everything going on, I figured I could use some downtime. I was looking forward to a peaceful day of catching up on my favorite TV shows and maybe reading a book or two. Little did I know, I was about to set in motion a chain of events that would leave me questioning my life choices for the next few days. It all began when I went to the grocery store. Nothing fancy, just a quick stop to grab some essentials: bread, eggs, milk, a few frozen dinners. As I was wandering through the aisles, I came across this new brand of energy drink that I had never seen before. It was in a sleek, black can with bold red lettering, and the label promised to give you the energy of 1,000 suns. Now, I'm not usually one to get swept up in marketing gimmicks, but for some reason, I thought, hey, why not? I could use a little extra energy today. I tossed it into my cart, alongside my usual purchases, and went about my day. I didn't think too much of it until later that afternoon when I cracked open the can and took my first sip. It was okay. A little sweet, a little bitter, but nothing special. But within 20 minutes, something started to happen. My heart rate picked up, my palms got sweaty, and I felt a rush of energy coursing through me. At first, I was kind of impressed. I hadn't felt this awake in weeks. But then things started to get weird. I found myself pacing around my apartment, unable to sit still. My mind was racing, bouncing from one thought to another, and I couldn't focus on anything. I thought, okay, maybe I overdid it with the energy drink, but I figured it would wear off eventually. So I tried to distract myself by starting a movie. That's when the real chaos began. As soon as I sat down on my couch, I realized I wasn't actually watching the movie. I was, well, kind of staring at the TV screen, but my brain was somewhere else entirely. Thoughts started to spill out of me like a floodgate had opened. I thought about the weirdest stuff, old childhood memories, unresolved arguments with friends, random things I'd seen online months ago. It was like the energy drink had unlocked a flood of thoughts I had buried for years. Then, for no apparent reason, I decided to clean my apartment. I mean really clean it. Like, not just vacuum the floor or wipe down surfaces, but I scrubbed the walls, dusted every inch of the place, rearranged my furniture, and even organized my books by genre and color. I was so hyper-focused that I didn't even notice the hours passing. By the time I was done, it was 10 p.m., and my apartment looked like something out of a magazine. But that wasn't the worst part. As the night wore on, I started to feel even more agitated. My thoughts were spiraling out of control. I kept thinking that maybe I wasn't supposed to be at home on a Saturday, like there was something I should be doing, but I couldn't figure out what. So, I grabbed my keys, threw on my jacket, and left the apartment in a frenzy. I didn't even tell anyone where I was going. I just started driving. I'm not sure why I thought it was a good idea to drive, but I ended up at a 24-hour diner. I sat down at a booth, ordered a coffee, and tried to calm my nerves. But as I sat there, I realized I couldn't sit still. I kept fidgeting with my napkin, my utensils, and the salt shaker. The waitress gave me a weird look, but I was too caught up in my own head to notice. At some point, I stood up, walked to the restroom, and started pacing in front of the mirror. I didn't recognize myself. I was sweating, twitching, and staring at my reflection like I was some kind of science experiment gone wrong. I quickly realized that I couldn't stay in the diner anymore. I needed to leave. I paid for my coffee, which, in hindsight, was probably the best decision I made all night, and bolted out of there. But that wasn't the end of it. I decided that I needed to really clear my head, so I drove to the nearby park and just started walking in circles around the parking lot. I don't know how long I was there, but at some point, I realized it was 3 a.m. I was exhausted, disoriented, and still incredibly wired from that damn energy drink. That's when I made the decision to go back home. But not before I decided to send a series of frantic text messages to my best friend, telling him that I was on the brink of a breakthrough and that I was going to change the world. I don't know why I thought this was a good idea, but it felt like the right thing to do in the moment. When I got home, I collapsed into bed and passed out instantly. But not before I had a series of weird, vivid dreams about, well, let's just say the dreams involved a lot of weird conspiracy theories, spaceships, and an alternate version of myself running for president. The next morning, I woke up and felt like a completely different person. I had this strange mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. I couldn't remember all the details of the night before, but I knew I'd made some questionable choices. My phone was buzzing with texts from my friend, asking if I was okay and telling me that he was concerned for my mental health after the messages I had sent. I quickly realized that I had totally overdone it with the energy drink. I Googled it, and it turns out that it was some kind of experimental energy formula that was being tested for high-stress environments, like military or high-performance athletes. It was supposed to give you a burst of focus and energy, but it had side effects, ones that I had unfortunately discovered firsthand. The website even warned that it could cause excessive anxiety, restlessness, and hyperactive thinking. Basically, it was designed to make you feel like you were on speed, and I had just accidentally downed an entire can of it. To make matters worse, I found a message in my inbox from my friend, who had saved screenshots of my manic texts. "I know you're excited about life, but maybe dial it back a bit, man." I had to apologize profusely, explaining that I was just experimenting with a new drink and had lost track of time. It was embarrassing. So yeah, I spent the rest of the weekend recovering from my ill-advised energy binge, trying to apologize to my friend, and vowing never to touch another one of those drinks again. Needless to say, I'm sticking to regular coffee from now on. No more energy breakthroughs for me. TIFU by accidentally turning my grandma's house into a full-on crime scene. It all started on a typical Saturday afternoon. I was visiting my grandma's house, a cozy little place on the outskirts of town. It's been in our family for generations, and while it's a bit old and creaky, I love spending time there. Grandma is an amazing cook, always whipping up something delicious and, frankly, just having a good time in her company is enough to brighten anyone's day. That particular weekend, I was going over to help her with a few things around the house. She had been complaining that the kitchen sink was leaking, and the roof needed some patching up. As a good grandson, I figured I could at least handle the minor repairs and give her a hand with some of the chores. When I got there, she was in the kitchen, humming to herself while stirring a pot of something that smelled suspiciously like my favorite beef stew. I immediately noticed something was off, though. The house was eerily quiet. No sound of the TV playing in the background, no radio, and no clattering of pans. It's not that it was silent, it was more like the usual comforting noise was just absent. "Hey, Grandma. How's it going?" I called as I walked in. "Oh, you know, dear, just the usual. I'm glad you could come by today. I think the sink is leaking worse than ever." "It's been a real hassle," she said, motioning me toward the kitchen. I set my bag down and walked over to the sink to inspect the damage. Sure enough, there was a noticeable puddle forming under the faucet. I grabbed a wrench from under the sink, ready to get to work. "So, what's the deal with the roof? You said there was a leak up there too?" I asked as I started fiddling with the sink pipe. "Yeah, but it's been pretty minor. I'll get around to it eventually. I'm just worried the water will start coming in during the next rainstorm," she explained. "And I'm sure you've got better things to do than fix my roof. I don't want to keep you from your plans." I assured her I was happy to help, and while I worked on the sink, I thought about what else I could do. Grandma had been having a lot of little problems around the house lately, and I figured it wouldn't hurt to tackle a couple more things if I could. As I was tightening the pipes, I noticed a strange little box wedged behind the cabinets. I hadn't seen it before, and curiosity got the better of me. It was a small black metal box, about the size of a shoebox, and it had a small red button on the top. "Hey, Grandma, what's this?" I asked, holding it up. "Oh, that old thing," she replied dismissively. "It's just an old tool my brother used to keep around. I'm not sure what it does anymore. He was always messing with gadgets and machines. He worked as a locksmith, if I recall." I wasn't convinced. There was something about that box that felt wrong. It didn't look like an old tool, and the red button on top was a little too perfect, as if it had been designed to be pushed. For a moment, I thought about just leaving it alone. But I was curious. I mean, I was already fixing her sink. What harm could pressing one little button do, right? I pressed the button. At first, nothing happened. I even thought I might have just been overthinking it. But then, there was a loud click from behind me, and I spun around just in time to see the kitchen lights flicker. The ground beneath my feet seemed to rumble lightly, and for a second, I thought maybe it was just the old wiring in the house acting up. But the lights flickered again, this time more violently. Before I could even process what was happening, the front door burst open with a loud bang. I froze in place, staring at the door in confusion, my mind racing. And then, to my absolute horror, 3 men in full tactical gear stormed into the house, rifles raised. Everyone on the ground. "Now," one of them shouted. I didn't know what was going on. My brain was in full-on panic mode. What had I done? Was this some sort of prank? Was Grandma involved in some kind of illegal activity? I looked over at her, and she was sitting calmly at the kitchen table, her hands folded in front of her, as if this wasn't her first rodeo. "Ma'am, is everything okay?" one of the officers asked, addressing Grandma. "Oh, it's just my grandson. He's here to fix the sink." "No need for all this fuss," she said with an unbothered smile. "I'm sure it's just a mistake." I stood there, completely frozen, while the officers looked at me with a mixture of suspicion and confusion. "Sir, we need to know what you've activated," one of them said sternly. I didn't mean to." I just pushed a button on this box. I swear I didn't know what it was. I stammered. I thought I was going to faint. I had no idea what was happening or why these men had stormed in like this. It was only then that I realized the box wasn't just a random tool. It was some kind of high-tech device, and by pressing that button, I had probably triggered some sort of alarm system. Maybe a silent alert? I didn't know. All I knew was that I was about to get arrested, and Grandma didn't seem remotely concerned. The lead officer approached me cautiously. "Ma'am, is this a family heirloom or something?" he asked Grandma. "Not quite," she replied, still calm as ever. "But I suppose you could say it's been passed down for a while." It was then that I noticed the officer's face change. He looked back at the others, who were now starting to relax a little. "So it's not a bomb," one of them muttered, still eyeing the box. "Definitely not a bomb," Grandma replied with a shrug. "It's a security system. My brother installed it years ago, just in case anyone tried to break in." The officers exchanged confused looks. I'm sure they were expecting something far more dangerous, like a high-tech weapon or a literal explosive device. After a tense few moments, one of them finally let out a laugh, clearly relieved. "Well, we certainly overreacted," the officer said with a sheepish grin. "Just, please don't press any more buttons like that." I was still in shock, my heart pounding, but at least I wasn't going to jail. As the officers began to leave, they gave us a few more warnings and cautioned us about the risks of messing with things we didn't understand. I was so embarrassed I could barely speak. Grandma, on the other hand, simply smiled at me and said, "Well, at least you got the sink fixed." The rest of the day passed in a blur. Grandma made me a giant plate of stew to calm my nerves, and we both tried to laugh off the whole thing. But I'll never forget the look on the officers' faces when they realized they had just stormed into my grandma's house because I pressed a button on a decades-old security system. Lesson learned: don't touch anything that looks like it could be connected to some high-tech, family-inherited security device, especially if you have no idea how it works. At least the sink got fixed. TIFU by trying to surprise my wife with a romantic scavenger hunt and almost getting arrested for kidnapping, so this happened last weekend and I'm just now starting to find the humor in it. My wife and I have been married for 3 years, and I've always considered myself a romantic gesture kind of guy. I like doing the little things: flowers, breakfast in bed, surprise notes in her purse. But this time, I wanted to go big. I'd been planning a romantic scavenger hunt for weeks to surprise her on our anniversary. The plan was simple: clues leading her to different sentimental places around the city tied to our relationship, our first date, the park where we had our first kiss, the place I proposed. At each stop, I had arranged a little gift and a clue to the next location. It was going to culminate in her meeting me at this cozy little restaurant where I'd reserved a private table. I was even going to sing to her. Corny, I know, but we both like corny. Anyway, I wanted the first clue to be delivered in a memorable way, so I asked my buddy Kyle to dress up in a dumb detective outfit and show up at her office pretending to be from a love crimes unit, complete with a fake badge and everything. He was supposed to give her a fake subpoena that was actually the first clue. He thought it was hilarious. I thought it was hilarious. What could possibly go wrong? Apparently everything. So, Friday afternoon, Kyle walks into her office building, wearing a trench coat, sunglasses, and this plastic detective badge I printed out at home. He marches up to the receptionist and says, "I need to see Mrs. Delgado immediately. This is a matter of romantic urgency." The receptionist, who didn't know who Kyle was and clearly didn't find the trench coat funny, refused to let him in. So Kyle, being Kyle, decided to just walk past her. Security was called. Kyle starts trying to explain that this is part of a surprise love mission and flashes his ridiculous badge like that's going to help. By the time my wife comes out to see what's going on, Kyle's being detained by 2 security guards, still trying to hand her the clue and yelling, "Tell her I'm Cupid, damn it." I'm completely oblivious to all of this, by the way, because I'm at the second location setting up a small picnic basket and writing a cheesy poem. I get a call from my wife, and before I can even say hello, she goes, "Did you send someone pretending to be a cop to my office?" I pause. Then I laugh. Big mistake. She does not laugh. Security thinks he was trying to impersonate an officer. They've called the real police. Now I'm freaking out, trying to explain that it's all part of a scavenger hunt and that Kyle's just a dumbass, not a criminal. But it's too late, the police show up and detain Kyle for questioning. Turns out, impersonating any sort of law enforcement, even jokingly, is a bad idea. They're not amused by Love Crimes Unit. They're also not amused by the badge, which, while clearly fake to me, looks close enough to be an issue. Now I'm on my way to the police station with a folder full of scavenger hunt clues and a heart-shaped box of chocolates, trying to convince the cops that this is all a huge misunderstanding. After a lot of talking, some very embarrassed apologies from Kyle, and me showing them the rest of the clues and my very elaborate plans, they eventually let him go. But they give him a warning and tell me I'm lucky they're not pressing charges too for orchestrating it. At this point, the scavenger hunt is completely derailed. My wife is livid, not because of the police incident, well, partly because of that, but more because she's now embarrassed in front of her coworkers and has zero interest in traipsing around the city following clues. So I cancel everything. The restaurant, the flowers, the poems. Later that night, I'm trying to salvage the evening by ordering takeout and apologizing profusely when she finally cracks a smile. "You're an idiot," she says. "But at least you're my idiot." So it could have ended worse. Except it does. Because remember the second location where I left the picnic basket and poem? I forgot to go back and clean it up. That area? It's a public park. And apparently, leaving a suspicious-looking basket wrapped in red ribbon with a note that says, "The next piece of your heart is here," doesn't look romantic to just anyone. Someone called the bomb squad. They cordoned off the whole area, evacuated part of the park, and had a robot check the basket. The next day, I get a call from the local police again. This time it's not a warning, it's a stern reminder that leaving unattended items in public spaces can lead to legal trouble and, at the very least, public panic. I have to go down and explain myself again, this time to a different set of very tired-looking officers who now think I'm some hopeless lunatic with a flair for unintentional domestic terrorism. So to recap, I tried to surprise my wife with a romantic scavenger hunt. My best friend almost got arrested for impersonating a federal agent. My wife now has a reputation at work as someone with an unhinged husband. And I accidentally caused a bomb scare in a public park. Moral of the story? Romance is not dead, but it definitely should come with a risk assessment. Hey, friends! If you enjoy this content, don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. We really want to know what you like and what can be improved. What do you think of the video? Are there any topics you'd like to see in future videos? Your feedback really helps us get better. Thanks for being with us. TIFU by trying to impress my girlfriend's dad and ending up in the hospital with a dislocated shoulder, a ruined barbecue, and a lifelong nickname. So this happened about a year ago, but it still gets brought up at every family gathering, so I figured I'd share it. For context, I, 28M, had been dating my girlfriend, 27F, for about 8 months, and things were going really well. She's smart, funny, and gorgeous. Her family lives a few hours away, and she invited me to their annual summer barbecue, a big event where the whole extended family comes out, drinks flow, people swim, kids run around, the works. Now, I don't usually get nervous meeting people, but this was different. Her dad is this ex-Marine, old-school kind of guy who owns a construction company, drinks his beer warm, and refers to feelings as weakness leaks. My girlfriend told me he's hard to impress, but she thought we'd get along since I work in software and he's been trying to get his business more tech-savvy. My dumb brain interpreted that as be extra manly to gain his respect. We get to their place on a Saturday around noon. The place is beautiful, big backyard, in-ground pool, grill going, country music playing, not my thing, but I wasn't gonna say anything. Her dad, let's call him Ron, comes out in cargo shorts and a tank top, looking like he eats nails for breakfast. He gives me the classic firm handshake, looks me up and down like I'm a car he's thinking of buying, and nods. I took that as a win. For the first hour, I'm doing okay. I chat with some cousins, help carry a cooler, and even get a small laugh out of Ron with a dad joke about propane. I'm feeling good. Then the moment comes, Ron starts up this friendly but macho competition of backyard games. Think cornhole, tug of war, horseshoes, and, God help me, tree climbing. I should have tapped out, but I had a point to prove. Now, for reference, I'm not out of shape. I go to the gym a couple times a week, but I'm no athlete. Ron, meanwhile, is 55 and built like a brick wall. Despite that, I managed to hold my own in most of the games. I beat one of the uncles at cornhole and narrowly lose tug of war. Spirits are high. Beer is flowing. Ron is starting to look at me like I might be worthy of mating with his offspring. Then comes the tree. In the far corner of the yard, there's this massive oak tree. Some teenage cousin jokes that he used to climb it as a kid. Ron smirks and says, bet you can't do it now. The kid backs down. I, 6 beers deep and running on pure testosterone, say, I'll do it. Ron raises an eyebrow. You climb that tree, I'll give you one of my rare bourbons. At this point, my brain hears, climb the tree, get his respect and expensive liquor. I look at the tree. It's big, probably 20 to 25 feet up before the first real branch, but it's got a few knots and decent footholds. I figure if I get to that low-hanging branch, I'm golden. Everyone gathers around. I kick off my shoes, finish the rest of my beer, and start climbing. At first, it's going fine. I get a decent grip, pull myself up a few feet. People are cheering. Ron is watching with this look like he's half impressed, half expecting me to fall and break my neck. Which, spoiler alert, I almost do. I'm about 10 feet up when I realize I may have overestimated my abilities. The bark is rough, I'm sweating, and the footholds are starting to feel smaller. I should have stopped there. But no. I spot a branch maybe 2 feet higher and think, if I just grab that, I can swing a leg over and pose like a badass. I lunge for the branch. My hand catches it, but it's damp. My grip slips. My foot doesn't find traction. Time slows down as I realize I've let go of the trunk entirely. I remember hearing someone yell, "Oh no," as I began to fall backwards. I flail. I twist. I try to land on my feet. I do not land on my feet. Instead, I crash onto the ground with all the grace of a bag of bricks. I immediately hear a sickening pop and a jolt of pain in my left shoulder. I try to sit up and can't. Everything spins. Ron is suddenly standing over me, shaking his head like I'd just lost a war. My girlfriend runs over, panic in her eyes. Her mom calls 911. The teenage cousin is filming. And Ron? He leans down and says, "You okay, Tarzan?" Long story short, ambulance comes, I've dislocated my shoulder and have a mild concussion. They take me to the ER, where a nurse literally laughs when I tell her what happened. My girlfriend holds my hand the whole time, but I can tell she's both mortified and kind of impressed I committed that hard. The worst part? Ron did give me the bourbon. But only after making me drink it left-handed, in a sling, while wearing a t-shirt that said I survived Ron's backyard Olympics. Her uncle had it printed that night. Now every summer, they invite me back. And every year, someone yells "Climb the tree" when I show up. They call me Tarzan now. Even her grandma. Especially her grandma. So yeah, that's how I tried to impress my girlfriend's dad and ended up bruised, humiliated, and kind of bonded to the guy forever. Moral of the story, you can't out-macho a Marine. And trees are not to be messed with after 6 beers. TIFU by trying to be the cool uncle and ruining my sister's wedding reception. This happened a couple of months ago, but my family is still talking about it like it happened yesterday. For context, I, 28M, am the youngest of 3 siblings. My sister, 32F, got married recently and I was one of the groomsmen. My older brother, 35M, is the golden child of the family, successful lawyer, 2 kids, nice house, etc. I'm more the laid-back type, freelance video editor, bit of a party guy, still figuring stuff out. But I'm close to my niece, 5F, and nephew, 7M, and they think I'm hilarious. I wear that like a badge of honor. The wedding was a full weekend event. Friday rehearsal dinner, Saturday ceremony, Saturday night reception. My role was pretty minimal: show up, smile, support my sister. No problem. But I made a fatal error. I decided this was going to be my moment to prove I wasn't just the fun uncle, but also the reliable, classy adult who can be trusted not to drink too much or cause a scene. The rehearsal dinner went fine. I wore a collared shirt and even said something vaguely insightful about love when I toasted the couple. My mom was proud. My sister told me she was genuinely happy I was being normal. That wouldn't last. The ceremony on Saturday was beautiful. No issues. But then came the reception, and here's where things went off the rails. The venue was a vineyard in the hills, absolutely gorgeous, with a barn-style reception hall strung with fairy lights and catered by some trendy farm-to-table chef. There was an open bar. Dangerous words. I told myself I'd only have 2 drinks. Just 2. But then my cousin Sam, who I hadn't seen in years, handed me a bourbon and said, "You're not seriously nursing a gin and tonic all night, are you?" I didn't want to look lame. Bourbon it was. Then another. And another. At some point, I got challenged to a whiskey tasting by the bride's college roommate's husband. I don't even know his name, but I definitely tried to match him drink for drink. He was a former Marine. I was a freelance video editor. You can imagine how that went. Fast forward to dinner being cleared and the DJ starting up. I'm now comfortably sloshed, shirt half untucked, tie draped around my head like some kind of sweatband. My niece comes running up and asks me to dance. Of course I say yes. We're dancing like maniacs, me doing that exaggerated robot thing I thought was hilarious, her giggling so hard she can barely stand. Everyone's clapping. I'm in my element. Then the DJ drops "Yeah" by Usher and I completely lose any semblance of self-control. I yell, "This is my jam," and proceed to launch into what can only be described as a chaotic mix of breakdancing and interpretive flailing. At some point I try to do the worm and smack my chin on the floor. I get up too fast and knock into a server carrying a tray of champagne flutes. The tray crashes. Glass everywhere. The server's okay, but the moment I look up, I realize I've drawn the attention of the entire reception. It gets worse. Desperate to recover, I grab a mic from the DJ booth and slur into it, "Let's raise a toast to the bride and groom, and also to love, and dogs, and breakfast food, because honestly, breakfast is the most important meal of the day." People chuckle nervously. The DJ tries to take the mic back, but I won't let go. I just want to say, I continue, that I never believed in love until I saw my sister with Derek. I mean, I believed in it, but not like, metaphysically. Someone, probably my brother, kills the mic. I'm gently but firmly escorted off the dance floor by one of the groomsmen. I try to protest, but end up sitting outside by the fire pit, being handed water and judgmental glances by several extended family members. But here's the piece de resistance. Remember how I said I was trying to be the cool uncle? Well, my nephew thought my dance was the funniest thing he'd ever seen. He decided to imitate me during the couple's first dance. So as my sister and new brother-in-law sway to "Can't Help Falling in Love," there's my nephew in the background doing an impression of me doing the worm, then collapsing on the ground and yelling, "Breakfast," like a drunk Viking. It completely ruins the mood. I didn't even realize it until someone showed me the wedding video the next morning. My sister was surprisingly chill about the whole thing at first. She just gave me a long, disappointed hug and said, "Why are you the way that you are?" But then my mom gave me the talk. You know, the one that starts with, "You're not 21 anymore," and ends with, "Maybe it's time to take some things more seriously." Needless to say, I've been the butt of every family joke since. My brother made me a t-shirt that says, "Metaphysical Love and Breakfast." My niece and nephew keep asking me to do the worm speech. And my cousin Sam texts me whiskey bottle emojis every week. I haven't touched bourbon since. And while I'm still the fun uncle, I think I'll be skipping the dance floor at the next family wedding. Or at least staying away from the mic. TIFU by accidentally making my coworker think I was in love with him for a year. I, 29F, work in a small tech company. You know the type, open floor plans, free LaCroix, weird beanbag meeting rooms, and a dozen developers who haven't seen the sun in weeks. I work in project management, which means my job is basically reminding people what they promised to do while pretending I know what ref actor the microservice actually means. So, this all started about a year ago when a new developer joined the team. Let's call him Greg, 32M. Greg is, how do I put this? Very average. Nice, quiet, smart in a weird way, always smells like a mix of hand sanitizer and coffee. Not unattractive, but not the type who gets swiped right on based on profile pics alone. He had this habit of responding to everything with a slight pause and a very thoughtful like a professor being asked to define a sandwich. During his first week, I was assigned to onboard him. We hit it off in the usual work way, shared jokes about the vending machine, eye rolls during meetings, passive-aggressive emails we forwarded each other with commentary. Pretty standard stuff. Now, here's the thing. I have a bad habit of using emojis. Like, a bad habit. Not in work emails, obviously, I'm not a maniac. But in Slack, where formality goes to die, I'm like Picasso with the emoji palette. Need to say thanks? Approving a change? Mild encouragement? So I start using emojis when chatting with Greg. At first, it was just part of my normal Slack behavior. Then I noticed he'd actually respond to them, sometimes even send one back. I'm not sure why, but this delighted me. Maybe because most devs here communicate in grunts and Jira tickets. With Greg, I had an emoji buddy. The problem? Apparently Greg did not interpret emojis as friendly workplace chatter. Oh no. Greg thought this was the flirting. I started noticing he'd linger near my desk a little more. He began asking how my weekend was every Monday. He'd bring me coffee because I was already going, no big deal. One time he messaged me at 10 p.m. on a Friday about a bug and ended the message with "Hope you're having a chill night," smiley face, which, in context, felt oddly intimate. But I'm dense. I just thought he was being friendly. We work in a people bring their dogs to the office kind of place. This felt normal. Then, a few months in, I got a cold. Nasty one. I called out sick, expecting to fade into obscurity for a few days. Instead, Greg sent me soup. Like actual soup. Delivered to my apartment. I had never given him my address. I freaked out and asked around. Turns out our HR software had everyone's contact info available if you knew where to look. Creepy, yes. But Greg didn't see it that way. In his mind, this was some Nicholas Sparks level of devotion. I texted a polite thank you and told myself to start cooling things down. So I tried to dial back the emoji usage. Stopped with the hearts, dropped the smiley faces. No more or. But apparently, I wasn't clear enough, because Greg interpreted this as me playing hard to get. It came to a head last month during our company retreat. 3 days at a leadership development camp that's just trust falls and corporate lingo in a forest with bad Wi-Fi. There was a bonfire night. Drinks were flowing, marshmallows were burning, and Greg sat next to me, all weirdly fidgety. Then he turned to me, looked me dead in the eyes, and said, "I just want you to know I've really enjoyed getting to know you. I think there's something here." Now, I'm frozen. I didn't expect this. I thought he had maybe picked up on the chill. So I did what any awkward, confrontation-avoiding adult would do, I laughed. I laughed hard. Not at him, not mockingly, just pure nervous energy laughter. I sounded like a broken kazoo. Greg didn't take it well. He stood up without saying anything and walked away. That night, he switched cabins. The next morning, he avoided eye contact during breakfast, and at the end of the retreat, he left early without saying goodbye. I figured we needed space. So when we got back to the office, I gave it. No Slack messages unless it was strictly work-related. No more coffee runs. Just clean professionalism. Then came the kicker. Last week, Greg submitted his resignation. His reason? Pursuing other opportunities. Classic. Except the CTO, who I'm friendly with, let it slip during happy hour that Greg had cited a hostile work environment in his exit interview. Which is insane because we literally had HR-approved beanbag chairs. I asked our HR manager if it had anything to do with me. She just gave me that vague, tight-lipped smile HR people are trained to do and said, "We appreciate your professionalism through all of this." Now I'm spiraling. Did I harass him with emojis? Was I unintentionally leading him on for a year? Did my accidentally ruin this man's entire career? The worst part is I wasn't even into Greg. I just liked that he responded with a cat gif once. That was all it took. So yeah, I may have accidentally flirted someone into quitting their job. And now everyone in the office is whispering about how Greg left, and I have to spend every day pretending I'm totally fine and didn't emotionally wreck someone with Slack reactions. I've since gone emoji sober. No more for me. Just cold, dead text. Corporate. Monotone. The kind of messages that make you question your will to live. But somewhere, in the shadowy corners of the internet, Greg is probably telling his TIFU story about the overly friendly project manager who broke his heart with a dancing octopus emoji. TIFU by using a fake name at a restaurant and getting stuck in a lie for over a year. Let me preface this by saying I never expected this tiny, dumb decision to explode into a full-blown life-consuming alternate identity. I'm just a guy who wanted to avoid giving his real name at a restaurant one time, and now I'm a man living a double life because of a meatball sub. It started about a year ago. I was on my lunch break from a soul-numbing office job, and I stopped by this small sandwich shop a few blocks from work. It wasn't a chain, just a quirky, slightly hipster place run by a married couple who were so friendly it was borderline unsettling. The kind of place with handwritten chalkboard menus, ironic motivational quotes on the walls, and mismatched furniture that was probably stolen from 3 different grandparents. Anyway, I ordered a meatball sub, and when the guy at the counter asked for my name, I panicked. Not because I have an embarrassing name or anything, but because I'd just come from a horrible Zoom meeting where my boss kept saying my name wrong in 5 different ways, and I guess I had some kind of identity crisis moment. So when the guy at the counter looked up and asked, "Name?" I just said, "Greg." My name isn't Greg. It's Jason. They called out Greg when the sandwich was ready. I picked it up, and that should have been the end of it. But the sandwich? Incredible. Like, divine. I was hooked. I started going back 2-3 times a week. Each time, I told them my name was Greg. At some point, the owners started to recognize me. They'd smile and wave when I came in. Greg. The usual? They remembered my order, gave me free chips sometimes, even asked about my day. It was kind of nice, honestly. It felt personal. Like I was known. Seen. Except I wasn't. Greg was. It became too late to correct them. Every time I walked through the door, I lived as Greg. Greg became who I was from 12:30 to 1 p.m., 3 days a week. My coworkers joked about how often I went to the hipster sandwich cult, but I kept the name thing to myself. Then things escalated. One day, I brought a coworker, Rachel. It was casual. She was new, and we were both hungry, so I suggested the place. We walk in and immediately, the owners are like, "Greg. Great to see you, man." Rachel gives me this weird side eye and says, "Greg?" I laugh it off and say something about it being a long-running joke. She doesn't press it. Except Rachel starts coming with me more often. Then other coworkers join. Suddenly, it's a whole thing. "Let's do Greg's lunch spot," they'd say. Some of them even started calling me Greg as a joke, and I had to just lean into it because I couldn't possibly explain at this point. They thought it was hilarious. I started getting emails addressed Greg and little post-it notes on my monitor with doodles that said, "Greg is hungry." Haha. So funny. Kill me. Months pass. Greg gets invited to the sandwich shop's 1-year anniversary party. It's a big outdoor thing, with live music and all the regulars. I don't go. I can't. I ghost the invitation. But the next time I show up, they're like, "Greg, we missed you at the party." And before I can stop myself, I blurt out, "Yeah, sorry, I was visiting my parents in Oregon." I don't have parents in Oregon. I've never even been to Oregon. Now Greg has a backstory. Then, God help me, they ask if I want to be part of their new loyalty program. I say sure, thinking it's just a punch card. Nope. It's a full online system with a profile, birthday perks, email newsletter. "We already set it up for you, Greg," they say. "We used your card info from your last order. Just log in with your email." I panic. I make a new email, greglunchman42. TIFU by trying to impress my crush with an elaborate homemade dinner, and it went horribly wrong. So this happened last weekend, and I still can't believe it all unfolded like this. It all started when I found out that my crush, let's call her Sarah, was a huge fan of homemade food and cooking. We'd been friends for a while, and we'd talked about food a lot, how she loved trying new recipes, especially anything with complex flavors, and how she'd taken a cooking class in Italy a few years ago. I wanted to show her that I could be thoughtful and creative, so I thought, why not impress her with a fancy dinner? Now, I don't know the first thing about cooking. I can barely make scrambled eggs without burning them, but I figured that with a little research, I could pull it off. I went to my trusty old friend Google and started searching for fancy dinner recipes. After a few hours of deep diving into YouTube tutorials and food blogs, I found the perfect recipe, beef Wellington. It looked complicated, but I thought, hey, how hard could it be? Famous last words. I spent the next few days gathering the ingredients. I wanted everything to be perfect, so I took a trip to a specialty store to get the beef fillet, fresh mushrooms, and prosciutto. I even ordered some fancy puff pastry online, because apparently, that's what you need to make it truly authentic. I had everything prepared, or so I thought. The night of the dinner, Sarah arrived at my place around 6 p.m., and I greeted her with a bottle of wine I had picked out just for the occasion. She complimented my apartment, which I thought was a good sign, so I felt a little more confident. I invited her to sit at the dining table, which was set with my best dishes and lit with candles to create the perfect mood. I had even cleaned up the place, which was a minor miracle in itself. But then, things started to go downhill. I had planned everything perfectly, well, at least I thought I did. I prepped the beef fillet, seasoned it, and seared it in a pan as the recipe instructed. I placed it on a plate to cool while I moved on to the mushroom duxelle. I spent forever chopping the mushrooms, and even though I knew the mushrooms were supposed to be finely minced, I had this nagging feeling that I was making them too chunky. But hey, I was on a roll, so I carried on. I spread the prosciutto over plastic wrap, placed the duxelle on top, and then the beef fillet. Now, this is where the real trouble began. The recipe called for wrapping the whole thing in the prosciutto and mushroom mixture, and then wrapping that in puff pastry. Sounds simple, right? Well, I quickly learned that my puff pastry was more like an accordion than anything else. No matter how much I tried to roll it out, it kept folding up in awkward creases, and I could see it starting to stick to the rolling pin. At this point, Sarah was quietly sipping her wine in the other room, and I could hear her humming along to whatever was playing on my Spotify, so I figured I had a few minutes to work my magic. It took me almost an hour just to get the puff pastry wrapped around the beef. But when I went to put it in the oven, things got worse. The recipe said 40 minutes at 400 degrees Fahrenheit, but when I checked after 40 minutes, it looked, well, not quite right. The pastry wasn't golden brown, it was more of a sad beige color. The edges were completely burnt, and the beef looked like it had been in a war zone. But I was determined. I figured I could salvage it. I shoved it back in the oven and cranked the heat up. Meanwhile, I tried to keep the conversation going with Sarah, who was now just sitting there, probably wondering if I was making a bomb or cooking dinner. I could feel the sweat dripping down my back as I tried to casually tell her about my culinary journey and how I'd been learning all about the finer points of French cooking. She seemed impressed, but I could tell she was trying to mask her concern about why the house smelled like burnt plastic. Finally, the beef Wellington came out, looking even worse than before. The pastry was a charred mess. I thought, okay, maybe it'll still taste fine. I can salvage this. I nervously cut into the Wellington, and the interior, well, the interior was a disaster. The beef was overcooked, dry as cardboard, and the duxelle had somehow turned into a weird, mushy paste. It wasn't just bad, it was offensive to anyone who had ever tasted a properly cooked meal. At this point, Sarah was starting to look less impressed and more concerned. She asked if I needed help, but I just smiled awkwardly and told her it was just a minor setback. I plated what little of the dish was salvageable and brought it to the table, trying my best to maintain some sense of dignity. As soon as Sarah took her first bite, I knew it was over. Her face turned into a perfect mask of horror. She forced a smile and said, "Wow, this is unique." But I could tell she was just being polite. I, on the other hand, was drowning in a sea of regret and embarrassment. I couldn't even look at her because I was so mortified by how badly I had failed. This was supposed to be the grand gesture, the thing that would show her how much I cared, and instead, I was watching her try to politely choke down burnt, dry beef and soggy pastry. After what felt like an eternity of silence, I decided to come clean. I told her the truth, that I had no idea what I was doing, that I had just tried to follow a recipe from the internet, and that I was really sorry for ruining dinner. She let out a big laugh, which honestly was a huge relief. She told me that she appreciated the effort and that she'd actually had a similar disaster trying to make beef Wellington a few months ago. Apparently, it was a rite of passage for anyone who tried to make it. We ended up ordering pizza, and I think it might have been one of the best nights we'd had. By the end of the evening, we were both laughing about the disaster, and I think, in some weird way, it brought us closer. Sarah even jokingly suggested we start cooking classes together. Moral of the story: if you want to impress someone with your cooking, don't try something way out of your league unless you're prepared to eat your pride along with the meal. TLDR, tried to impress my crush with beef Wellington. Completely ruined it. Dinner was a disaster, but we ended up laughing and ordering pizza instead. TIFU by accidentally giving my best friend's mom a panic attack during a casual dinner party. I never thought a casual dinner party would be the setting for the worst mistake of my life. It all started with a simple invitation to a low-key evening at my best friend Josh's house. Josh and I have been friends since high school, and although we've grown up, we still hang out like we did back then, playing video games, talking about random stuff, and generally being a bit immature for our ages. It's one of those friendships where you're more like brothers than just friends. This dinner party was supposed to be a relaxing get-together. Josh invited a few close friends, and his mom, Karen, was making her famous lasagna. If you've ever tasted Karen's lasagna, you know it's legendary. She's one of those women who just knows how to cook, and her lasagna is basically the food equivalent of a warm hug. The evening started out innocuously enough. We gathered in the living room, chatting and catching up while Karen prepped the food in the kitchen. It was just a typical gathering, laughing about old memories, ribbing each other about things that happened in high school, and generally having a good time. There were only 6 of us, so it was intimate, but still lively enough to feel like a party. About an hour into the evening, after some drinks and appetizers, we all sat down at the dining table. It was an eclectic mix of people, Josh's childhood friends, a couple of people from his work, and of course, his mom. Karen, in her 50s, is one of those people who can talk to anyone and make them feel comfortable. She's super chill, super nice, and always ready to make sure everyone is having a good time. After the first round of lasagna, Josh's dad, who'd been at work and arrived a bit late, showed up and sat down at the table. He was a bit tipsy after a long day at the office but in good spirits. We joked around a little, talking about the latest gossip at work, when Josh brought up the idea of doing a small mind trick game to keep things lighthearted. Josh had this weird fascination with all things psychological. He'd recently read a book on perception and how easy it is to manipulate someone's thoughts and ideas, especially in a group setting. So naturally, he thought it would be hilarious to play a game where we all had to guess what each other was thinking. Now, normally I'm all for silly games at parties, but this is where things started to go south. Josh looked at me, grinning like a Cheshire cat, and suggested we play the guess the word game, where one person thinks of a word, and the others have to ask yes or no questions to figure it out. Simple, right? At first, it was pretty fun. I went first, and they all guessed pretty quickly that I was thinking of pizza, obviously. Then it was Josh's turn. He chose the word vacation, and we were all asking questions like, is it a place? Is it an activity? And so on. Everyone was having a good time, and the mood was light. That's when Josh's dad, trying to be funny, asked, is it something you'd do on a cruise ship? Everyone laughed, and we moved on, but this is where the disaster happened. Josh's mom, Karen, suddenly grew tense. She looked at me, and then at her husband, her face pale. I thought maybe she was just tired or having a moment of stress, but it was clear something was wrong. I assumed she was just being a little dramatic. She can be a bit of a hypochondriac sometimes, so I tried to make a joke to lighten the mood. Karen, are you okay? You're looking a little pale there. Did someone steal your lasagna recipe? That's when everything went sideways. Karen's eyes widened, and she suddenly stood up, pushing her chair back violently. Karen? Josh asked, clearly concerned. I need some air, she stammered, and before anyone could react, she bolted out the back door. Josh and his dad followed her outside, and the rest of us were left in awkward silence, trying to figure out what had just happened. No one could believe it. We were all completely dumbfounded. It wasn't until a few minutes later when Josh returned, looking completely exhausted and worried, that we got the full story. Apparently, Karen had been silently suffering from severe anxiety for the past few months, and the mention of a cruise ship had triggered a panic attack. She had a traumatic experience years ago on a cruise, something about being stuck in an elevator during a storm, and the idea of being on a ship again, even just in conversation, was enough to set off her anxiety. I felt absolutely horrible. I didn't know about any of this. Josh had never mentioned his mom's struggles with anxiety, and to be honest, I didn't even know she had that kind of trauma. To make matters worse, I had been completely oblivious to how serious her reaction was. Josh, understandably upset, took a moment to explain everything to the group. We all apologized, and I was left feeling like the biggest idiot on the planet. I had no idea my innocent joke about lasagna would trigger such an intense response. Karen eventually came back inside, looking much calmer but still shaken. She apologized for her reaction, but we all assured her that it wasn't her fault. She explained that she just needed to step outside and get some fresh air to clear her head. The rest of the night was a bit awkward, with everyone trying to make things right. We didn't finish the lasagna, Karen had lost her appetite, but we did sit and talk for a while longer. I kept apologizing, but Karen was very understanding. She told me it wasn't my fault and that she didn't want anyone to feel bad. I've learned a few valuable lessons from that night. The first is that sometimes you never know what people are going through, and even the smallest comment can have a bigger impact than you realize. The second is to always be a little more thoughtful with humor, especially around people you don't fully understand. I can't even look at a cruise ship without feeling guilty now. And whenever I see Karen, I make sure to give her plenty of space and always ask if she's feeling okay before cracking a joke. So, yeah. That's how I accidentally gave my best friend's mom a panic attack at a dinner party. If you're ever in a similar situation, please be more mindful than I was. A little empathy can go a long way. TIFU by accidentally becoming the bad guy at a wedding and getting banned from future family events. So, I, 28M, had an experience last weekend that I am still processing, and I feel like I need to share it, even though it's incredibly embarrassing. It all started when I was invited to my cousin's wedding. I haven't seen her in a while, but we're pretty close in age and I've always been fond of her. She's a genuinely nice person, and we get along well. The wedding was set to be a beautiful event, and I was excited to attend. My family isn't exactly big, so there was a small, intimate guest list, which meant that I'd get to catch up with several relatives I hadn't seen in years. The invitation arrived in the mail about a month before the wedding. It was a classic, "We'd love for you to be there to share in our special day," kind of thing. I RSVP'd quickly, of course, I'd go. I'm not a wedding crasher type, but I was genuinely excited to be a part of the event. In the back of my mind, I thought this would be a great opportunity to show off how well I was doing in life. You know, look good, dress up, and maybe talk about how I just got a promotion. Nothing too flashy, just a little humble bragging, if I'm being honest. The day of the wedding arrived, and everything started off perfectly fine. The venue was this gorgeous outdoor location, with a rustic barn and fairy lights strung everywhere. I had dressed well, not over the top, but certainly not underdressed either, navy suit, nice dress shirt, tie, the works. I arrived a bit early, which worked out because it gave me time to mingle with the early arrivals. I chatted with a few relatives and caught up with some cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. Everything seemed to be going smoothly. I had a glass of champagne, some small talk, and a few light-hearted laughs. Here's where I messed up. So, we're all sitting down for the ceremony, and the atmosphere is calm, everyone's in their seats, the bride's walking down the aisle with her father. The whole thing was touching, and I'll admit I was genuinely moved. That's when I made the first mistake. My phone buzzed. Now, I'll be the first to admit that I should have silenced my phone before walking in, but I didn't. The message was from a coworker who I'd been having a bit of back and forth with over an important project. I'd been working late all week to get this done, and we were finalizing the last stages of it. The message, which popped up on my screen during the bride's entrance, was about the final approval I was waiting on. I thought it was just a quick check-in, so without thinking too much about it, I pulled out my phone. I glanced down at the screen. Here's where I made my second mistake. The message from my coworker wasn't just an update. It was a complaint, essentially accusing me of failing to follow through on certain aspects of the project. Without even realizing it, I began typing a long, defensive response. I didn't even think about the fact that I was at a wedding, or that I was sitting in a packed room of people witnessing one of the most important moments in my cousin's life. I was fully immersed in trying to clear my name and fix the issue. It didn't hit me that I was causing a disruption until I heard the show sound. My cousin's grandmother, a lovely old lady who I hadn't seen in years, had apparently noticed that I was typing on my phone during the ceremony. She gave me this disapproving glare that should have been a sign, but at the time, I thought it was just an innocent look. I carried on. The bride, my cousin, reached the altar. Everyone stood up. I looked up briefly, then went right back to my phone. I didn't even notice my cousin, who had been one of the most excited brides-to-be I'd ever met, staring at me with confusion. The third mistake was that I didn't realize how much time had passed. I was so wrapped up in my argument with my coworker that I didn't notice the awkward silence building in the room. I was so focused on my phone, typing away at my message, that I didn't even realize people were staring at me. The bride and groom said their vows, and people were wiping away tears, but not me. I was typing a full paragraph, and in my mind, I was winning this work fight. It wasn't until I heard a faint voice say, "Can you put the phone down, please?" that I finally looked up. It was the officiant, the person leading the ceremony. The entire room had gone quiet. My cousin, the bride, was visibly uncomfortable, staring at me with this mix of confusion and annoyance. I didn't realize the gravity of the situation. I stammered a quick, "Sorry, just a work thing," and tried to put my phone down. But it was too late. The atmosphere had completely shifted. People were whispering, my cousin was upset, and it was clear that the ceremony had been disrupted. The officiant continued, but there was an unmistakable tension in the air. I could feel the eyes of everyone on me, and it was as if the weight of the situation was finally sinking in. I had ruined a major part of my cousin's big day by not having the decency to put my phone away for a mere 30 minutes. The rest of the ceremony felt like a blur. I sat there feeling like the biggest idiot in the room. But it got worse. After the ceremony, there was a cocktail hour before dinner. I tried to apologize to my cousin, but she was cold toward me. She said, "You could have been present today. It was important to me, and you just couldn't put the phone down." I was stunned. I tried to explain that I was dealing with a work issue, but she wasn't having it. At this point, her family, who were all pretty close-knit, had also taken note of what happened, and they weren't happy. I was essentially blacklisted for the rest of the evening. When the dinner started, I sat at a table by myself, feeling like a pariah. My family had grouped up at the other tables, avoiding eye contact with me. My cousin's parents, who I've always gotten along with, pulled me aside later and said, "We understand that work is important, but there's a time and place. You ruined the moment. Please don't do this again." Needless to say, I spent the rest of the night awkwardly nursing my drink and trying to avoid any more attention. At some point, I just left early. I wasn't kicked out, but I definitely felt like I might as well have been. I haven't heard from my cousin since, and the family group chat has been pretty quiet, which isn't typical. To top it all off, my coworker didn't even respond to my message until the next day, and it wasn't even about what I thought. They had already cleared up the issue and had simply asked for my thoughts on the final revisions. So yeah, I managed to mess up a wedding by being an idiot. I was too absorbed in something that wasn't important in the grand scheme of things, and in the process, I ruined one of my cousin's most important moments. The whole family is now talking about how I can't be trusted at weddings anymore. I've learned a valuable lesson. Sometimes, it's better to just let go of the small stuff and be present for the people who matter. But at this point, I think I'll be staying out of family events for a while. I'm not sure how I can ever live this one down. TIFU. By accidentally proposing to my best friend at his wedding. I have a pretty close-knit group of friends, and one of them, let's call him Alex, has been my best friend since childhood. We've been through everything together: high school drama, college adventures, and countless late-night talks about life. Naturally, when Alex met his now wife, Sarah, I was beyond happy for him. They were great together, and I could see them spending the rest of their lives together. So, last weekend, Alex got married. It was a beautiful ceremony, and I was genuinely excited for him. But little did I know that I was about to make a colossal fool of myself. And to make things even worse, it was during the most important part of the day, the vows. Here's what happened. The wedding was held in this picturesque little chapel on the outskirts of the city. The venue was small but elegant, with white roses everywhere, and the sun was shining just perfectly through the stained glass windows. It was like something straight out of a rom-com. I'd been looking forward to the whole event for months, and everything was going according to plan, until it was time for the speeches. I'd been asked by Alex to be his best man. It was an honor, really, since he and I had been through so much together, and I'd watched him grow into the man he was now. So naturally, I was prepared to give a heartfelt speech. The night before, I'd stayed up late perfecting it. It was going to be touching, funny, and I wanted to make sure I made Alex proud. Now, I'll admit, I've always been a little bit of a mess in high-pressure situations. I've never been great at public speaking, and I'm prone to awkward moments. But I wasn't about to let that stop me, not when it was my best friend's big day. I took a deep breath, walked up to the podium, and started my speech. Everything was going smoothly at first. I told everyone how Alex and I met in elementary school, how we played soccer together, how he'd been there for me during tough times. The crowd laughed, they smiled, it was going well. And then, without even realizing what I was doing, I started talking about my friendship with Sarah. I mentioned how Alex and Sarah met and how I had seen the instant spark between them. But, as I was speaking, I must have gotten too caught up in the emotional moment, and I said something that completely derailed the whole event. "Sarah," I said, "I'm so happy for you. You've always been there for me as well. You're like the sister I never had, and honestly, I've always known we were meant to be. You're my best friend, and Alex is lucky to have you. But if anything ever happened to him, I'd want you to know I'd take care of you. I'd be here for you, no matter what, because I love you, Sarah. I always have." The room went dead silent. Everyone in the crowd froze, and I could feel the temperature in the room drop about 10 degrees. I had no idea what had just come out of my mouth. I had literally just told my best friend's wife that I loved her, at his wedding. Not only was that incredibly inappropriate, but I also had no idea what had possessed me to say something like that. It took me a moment to realize what I'd just done. My brain raced as I looked over at Alex, who was standing there, frozen in shock. His face was pale, and his jaw was slightly open, clearly processing what I'd just said. Meanwhile, Sarah looked like she had seen a ghost. She didn't know what to say, and the silence lingered for what felt like an eternity. I tried to salvage the situation. Wait. I didn't mean it like that. I mean, I love you in the platonic way. Like a sister. Like a really, really good friend." I stammered, but the damage was done. The awkwardness was palpable. I could feel the eyes of every guest on me, and I wished I could just disappear. I didn't know what to do, so I just continued my speech, trying to play it off. But every word felt like it was just digging me deeper into this pit of despair. By the time I finished my speech, I was barely able to look at either Alex or Sarah. I stumbled back to my seat, heart racing, hands shaking. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. I don't even remember the rest of the speeches. I don't remember the dinner or the dancing. All I could focus on was the fact that I had just made the most colossal mistake of my life. Later on, when I finally got the courage to apologize to Alex and Sarah, things didn't go as well as I'd hoped. Alex was clearly hurt, and Sarah just looked confused and uncomfortable. She told me that she understood it was probably just a slip of the tongue, but I could tell that the whole incident had left a weird tension in the air. Alex, being the great guy he is, said he didn't take it personally, but it was obvious that he was shaken. The next few days were awkward. I tried to text Alex to apologize again, but he wasn't responding like he normally would. I didn't blame him. I had crossed a line, and there was no easy way to fix that. The damage was done, and there was no going back. To make matters worse, people started coming up to me at work and at the bar, asking me how I felt about the whole situation. Apparently, word had gotten around quickly. I guess it was the talk of the wedding. I never thought I'd be the subject of wedding gossip in such a bizarre way, but here we were. I spent the next few days in a haze, trying to figure out how I could make it up to both of them. Eventually, I ended up sending a heartfelt letter to Alex and Sarah, explaining how much I valued their friendship and how deeply sorry I was for my words. I also made it clear that I would never do anything to jeopardize their marriage. I know I can't undo what happened, but I hope that my apology will help heal the awkwardness I created. It's been a couple of weeks since the wedding, and things have started to return to normal, but I'll never forget that moment. I learned the hard way that, sometimes, your words can slip out before your brain can catch up, and there's no easy fix for it. I'm just grateful that Alex and Sarah are still speaking to me, even if it's a bit more cautiously now. Moral of the story: if you're the best man at a wedding, keep your emotions in check. And whatever you do, don't tell the bride that you've always loved her. Even if you mean it in a purely platonic way, it's not going to go over well. Trust me. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss new videos. Also, leave a comment, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Your support and engagement mean a lot to me. See you in the next video.